Hi, everyone. Thanks again for coming out. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Yvonne Villarreal, and I cover television at the LA Times. So let's bring out our guests. First up is executive producer and director Ron Howard. Samantha Colley. McElhatton, Kenneth Biller, showrunner and executive producer, and our Einstein, Geoffrey. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I feel like we have to start with the fact that our introduction to Einstein in this series is with his pants around his ankle.
He's only human.
Talk about starting out that way and already sort of playing with our, ideas of who this man is, like showing us that there's this other side of him. Any of you?
Oh, was that a question?
No, talk about showing that side of him, this other side to him.
Well, I think, the purpose of the whole 10 hours of storytelling was to get rid of the t-shirt image that people wear to there should be an emoji of Einstein, I would really know that. But to dig deeper and go, why did he become one of the most famous people? It was him and Chapman and Lindbergh. They were the big guns in the 20th century, How did that happen? So it's good to have 10 hours to see where did he come from in his adolescence and childhood at certain points later. To kickstart with scenes that say, look, this is not stuffy academic material. It's going to be engaging, I always feel certain if Shakespeare had written this story, he would start with some guy getting assassinated and on the first page, because it ripples through, and that story does in fact set up one of the many layers of threads that we watch as the National Socialists come to power and so forth.
And you look like you had one minute something.
Oh no, I was just going to say, the other thing about it is that it's true. Einstein had a very active libido. He really had an affair with his secretary, Betty Neumann, among other assignations. And I think Geoffrey's right. When we started out with the project, and even got Noah Pink is here in the front row, who was the writer of the first episode. And even in Noah's original script, which changed a lot by the time we got to shoot it, the goal was to say who is Einstein the man, and there are a lot of things about Einstein the man. He's very flawed and really complicated and fascinating, and very sexual, and that was important to show.
I think to me it was, what I learned about it, what I became fascinated by, was in terms of the things that we didn't know about Einstein, were in fact the challenges or the potential impediments to his sort of offering the world everything that he had to give, and sometimes he was in his own sort of maverick thinking and bohemian lifestyle that created complications that were presented obstacles. So did society. His religion was a problem, and so I think in order to sort of do the thing I really wanted to do, which is the only kind of cautionary side of this story, which is look how close we came to not benefiting from this person's genius. And if you then think about the circumstances that he was in and who he was, well, it's not entirely laudable every minute of the day. So when in our moment, who may be making some missteps but has a tremendous amount to offer, or who may be threatened by an oppressive system or government who has a lot to offer. And I just thought it was important to dramatize that, and it's glib to sort of say we wanted a warts and all look, but I think in this particular case, just to sort of say, no, absolute, undeniably human being.
Yeah. There was a marvelous photo was it in the New York Times, I think, yesterday, but LA Times, during the Science March. It was so inspirational that so many people turned up on Earth Day for that theme. And there was this one poster that stood up out of the crowd, and it was a portrait of Einstein saying, "This is what a migrant looks like."
Talk about the show coming out now and the poignancy it sort of has. Like, in addition to, you know, this Science March, you know, he was also up against this political upheaval at the time. Geoffrey, I did want to ask, you know, what work you did with Johnny to sort of align the two of you so that you're portraying the same man.
Johnny and I met on Skype because I was in Melbourne and he was in the UK when we knew we were both playing the same character. And we sort of instantly agreed we wanted to get past just using mimicry of existing newsreel footage, or in his case, in the young part of his life, photographic work. And I said, well, that's true. We know he's a scientist. Everything he does almost in every scene comes from a scientific personality. And then Johnny, out of the blue, would just send me a photo of Bob Dylan at a 1964 press conference, and he said, isn't this young Einstein? You know, he's a rebel, he's a radical, he's a bohemian poet. And then I'd send him stuff, a shot of Harpo Marx, and I said, there's so much of Harpo in, you know, when you see Einstein in the footage getting off a boat in Britain or in New York for the first time, he'd walk down the gangplank, and within 15 seconds he'd have the reporters laughing, and he'd be laughing with them. You can't hear what they're saying. And I thought, you know, I tried to do half of my dialogue almost as Groucho Marx, but we were looking for more imaginative external archetypes, so we weren't locking ourselves into a form of venerable mimicry, you know, because then you don't get, as the writing suggests, what happened to the man, what was going on in the domestic life or the marital life or whatever.
Ron, how did that translate in terms of what you wanted to pick up on with the camera? Like, were there certain characteristics you wanted to hone in on, or?
I was interested in in pressure. There's the kind of pressure that he's facing as a young guy, as I said, misunderstood, struggling, you know, with his parents, struggling with his own feelings, struggling with the institutions around him, and then there's the pressure that the iconic, fully established Einstein is facing, which was, again, as I said earlier, important to understand that, you know, he was thrust into this role as a kind of a political figure, as a philosopher. Not what he wanted at all, and yet it was responsibility and a burden that he felt he needed to carry, and so that's what I was interested in. The connection between the characters I could quickly see was there in the writing to begin with. It was being refined through the rehearsal, and the two guys were discovering it. So that was thrilling for me. And then it was to try to develop that with you know, the other characters as well, because in that, you know, we were establishing things in that first episode when some of the characters, yours, you know, Haber, were going to be younger, and we had to work out all of those makeups, but also talk through the characters in a similar sort of way. So there was a tremendous amount that we were trying to accomplish in that first hour. You know, also an editorial style, but it was, you know, everything to me was about detail, a sense of Einstein's seeing the world either through his sense of it, and also focusing a lot on the women in his life and the way they were perceiving him. And I thought those were sort of the two perspectives to keep trying to utilize throughout that first episode to try to learn something about Einstein early.
For Sam and Michael and maybe everyone, I mean, after working on this project and all the research and prep work that you did for this, I mean, what did you take away? What did you find most fascinating, either about Einstein or your own characters?
I think I was probably fascinated about, I suppose, the amount of struggles and somebody with new ideas and that are going to break through glass ceilings and all that, and the battles and the struggles that he had throughout his entire life was kind of news to me, and very sad.
For me, I think Mileva Maric has made me a stronger woman. I think I try and suffer fools less and kind of push to be taken on an equal footing more. And I think from my character's point of view, I think it's really, really sad that the world doesn't know about Mileva Maric, and they don't respect and love her the way that I think she deserves to be, because I think she's a bit of a feminist icon that was kind of chewed up and spat out by history, really, and that was one of the real privileges for me of the role. I really felt a real responsibility, but also, again, real gratitude that I got to shed light on her story, and that hopefully one young woman or any woman really will use her as a bit of a cautionary tale and in their life kind of not take any crap.
And the other thing that I would say that's interesting to me as I think about it, and particularly now that that all 10 hours are shot and cuts are being refined, and I'm sort of have a little distance on it, but yes, he was a ladies' man. Yes, but I'm sure there were dalliances along the way, but there were a number of very, very strong women that he somehow reached out to and connected with in a very deep way, and it is interesting that they helped him, supported him, and in particular ways at particular points in his life, and but they were all strong. They were, he didn't seem to be deeply attracted to pushovers. Whatever that might be. In Mileva's case, it was this powerful intellect,
Yeah, I mean, Ken and Geoffrey can sort of talk about it. I mean, the show really explores loneliness and sort of the attraction to a beautiful mind. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Einstein was often isolated. Sometimes he isolated himself. I think it's probably, I guess it's a riff on it's lonely at the top. It's lonely to probably be the smartest person in the world. But what he did find, I think Ron is right, is that what you'll see in the next episode, you'll really get under the skin of the Mileva character. We just tease her a little bit at the end, and she's very intriguing. And you really get under her skin, and you see that Einstein was powerfully attracted to her and powerfully attracted to her intellect, and so he would stave off loneliness, I think, by finding the few people out there who really could understand him. And of course, his whole life, he was friends with Carl Jung and Marie Curie and all of these other brilliant intellects because he felt at home with them, and artists like Charlie Chaplin. But he is, we definitely do delve into the lonely periods of his life right up through the end, I would say. I don't want to give up way too much, but we worked on that a lot.
And in his letters toward the end of his life, he talks about the loneliness, or the fact that while he loved people, his work always was sort of front and center. And I think I'm forgetting who it is, but a friend whose wife, after a 50-year marriage, you know, passed away, and now he was alone, and Einstein wrote, well, he understood something that I never could solve, or something like that, and that's a, you know, a deep, long-lasting relationship.
What do you think he'd think of the world now?
Well, I think he'd be really curious. I mean, that's essentially, you know, he would be fascinated, I think, by the technology. He was really fascinated by it. We wouldn't have the technology, by the way. We wouldn't have GPS if he hadn't devised the theory of general relativity. It wouldn't exist. But I think he'd be very curious about the technology. I think he'd be deeply concerned at the present political situation. I think he would speak out vociferously against it. He would have been probably leading that march, I would think, even though he didn't necessarily always want to be out in public like that.
Yeah, you know, I think he, without a doubt, he would be, you know, he'd be bemused, but frustrated, you know, but there was also kind of a Zen-like acceptance with him. I think that a wisdom that, you know, he would do what he could, but there were limits, and that human experience needed to unfold in its own way somehow.
Final question for you guys. We could go down the line, as I know all of you will want to. Can any of you explain the theory of relativity?
How long have we got? Look, to be honest, it's, you know, I've got a grab on it. But really, you know, even Einstein was asked that question all the time, and he would kind of think up witty sound bites. He would never offend anyone socially, but you've maybe got to study for 8 or 10 years advanced, complicated mathematics and astrophysics and all of the disciplines that go into theoretical physical thinking to even begin to grab it. You know, we had 2 Czech physicists who were advisors on the set, and they were like Abbott and Costello. They were loving it, you know, because they understand. You know, but for me, reading the screeds of mathematical formulae, it's not how I think. I had to learn. I would ask them, you know, I have a running gag all the way through many episodes where Niels Bohr, played by a wonderful Danish actor, and Einstein were historically in a kind of competitive bickering argument about the value of quantum physics versus whatever. And I had to ask them, I said, I just need to know where to stress the right point, because all I'm doing is point scoring. I just want to win the argument. It's a little bit like, who's on first? No, I don't know who's on third. You know what I mean? There's a lot of comedy in that, about watching 2 esoteric scientists just picking away at each other.
Ron, can you?
There was a moment where I think I understood it. There was also a moment where I knew how we went to the moon, but I've forgotten that. I kind of crammed for the test. And I have a little, you know, instead of a cheat sheet, I've got, you know, like astronauts and physicists who are standing over here saying, that'll be all right. I think that's gonna fly, Ron. Okay, good, we got it. No.
Me neither, guys.
I kind of got it when he married his first cousin, which everyone kind of goes, wow, that's kind of weird, you know. I did The Importance of Being Earnest a few years ago, and Gwendolyn and Jack married their first cousins. Everyone seems to gasp. But, you know, I just sort of go, this is the bit I could understand, because Elsa was the woman he needed to manage his life, to brand him, and she was very proud of providing the solace and the solitude, and it's thankfully with 10 hours of television, that marriage gets the barometer, the dramatic barometer of what they go through together is really quite exhilarating. But I just thought, you know, they got married because, you know, that was his special theory of relatives.
With that, everyone, we'll end it.